So what is speech communication? If you've heard of people majoring in communication before, you may have heard David Letterman was a communication major at Ball State University, Sarah Palin was a communication major, and both of them went into careers on broadcast television. And a lot of people jump to the immediate conclusion that if you're majoring in communication, that you're going to be on the radio, you're going to be on TV, you're going to be in advertising. That's mass communication. And our neighbor across the street, the University of Oregon, has a very good journalism major, and I would be happy to refer you to that if that's the career path you're very sure that you want to pursue. Speech communication is a little bit different. And I would say that I've had colleagues before who worked in the field of mass communication, and at some schools there's one department of communication that includes both speech communication and mass communication, but they are their own separate specialized fields. And if I were to pin down what the difference was between the two, I would say that there are three things that distinguish them. First of all, in speech communication, you tend to have immediate feedback from the person that you're sending the message to. So if I'm talking into a radio microphone or if I'm looking into a television camera, I do not know what's happening at the other end. I do not know what the reaction is from my audience. But if I'm talking to a friend or if I'm giving a speech to a room full of people, I can see facial expressions. I can see smiles and nods. I can see people squirming impatiently in their seat, and I have some idea how it's being received. Now, a second distinction is that mass communication tends to be to much larger audiences. You can give a speech to a crowd as big as a stadium, and that would still be a speech communication or public address setting. But if it has to be televised, and if they're showing it around the world or even just around the city, then mass communication's aimed at bigger audiences. And the third and final distinction, and probably the fuzziest distinction of all, is ordinarily mass communication makes use of a technological medium to deliver the message. It's less likely that a speech communication situation will use some sort of technological medium. But that's not perfectly true. If you think about the use of cell phones, if you think about text messaging, a lot of that really is an interpersonal communication situation, and you do get some immediate feedback. If you think about the use of social networks, a lot of people would say that the internet is a broadcast medium, but you can, in a number of different circumstances, get immediate feedback. So that's how I would distinguish between mass communication and speech communication. Now, in speech communication, the kind of topics you study, the roots of the field are in the study of how to give a speech, going all the way back to Aristotle and the Rhetoric, which was a textbook on how a speaker can persuade an audience. But we've branched out further into how you can communicate effectively in give-and-take situations with smaller groups. And so in that, we take on topics like self-concept, because how you enter into communication has a lot to do with how you see yourself. We take on topics like the use of verbal codes. How does language figure into the give and take? But we also take on nonverbal codes. Nonverbal communication can range from anything as simple as your appearance and whether you're attractive to kinesic messages like posture, gestures, how you walk, the things that are often lumped together and called body language in self-help books, which you shouldn't trust, by the way. In tone of voice is another form of nonverbal communication, facial expression, invading people's personal space, how much space people like to have between themselves. That's a topic for nonverbal communication study. We also in speech communication deal with issues like listening. What does it take to be an effective listener, and in what situations is listening therapeutic? In what situations is listening a way to be a more effective leader? We also deal with conflict. How can you diffuse conflict, manage it effectively, find win-win solutions? So all of that, those are all things that people in mass communication wouldn't necessarily concern themselves with nearly as much, because they are more about taking the information and getting it out to an audience that they've projected through demographic methods. But with speech communication, it's a lot more hands-on, it's a lot more immediate, and I hope that this gives you a little bit more of an idea of what you study if you study speech communication, because not every communication major is preparing to go on TV or the radio.